When I was 14, my world was small, contained within the walls of a very average suburban home on a quiet, unremarkable street. It was a Tuesday, but I was homesick from school, curled up on the couch with a blanket and a dull fever. My dad had still gone to work, leaving me to the silence of the empty house. Around 6 p.m., my phone buzzed against the coffee table. It was a text from him. "Doing okay? Gotta stay late tonight. Love you." This wasn't unusual. Depending on his projects, he wouldn't get home until midnight or 2 a.m. I heated up a frozen meal, watched a few mindless hours of television, and eventually dragged myself upstairs to my bedroom, sliding under the covers. I scrolled through my phone for 15 minutes before my eyes grew heavy and I drifted off to sleep. I woke up hours later, disoriented and dead tired. The digital clock on my nightstand bled a harsh green glow through the dark. 2 a.m. I was half asleep, paralyzed by that heavy liminal fatigue where your limbs feel like lead. But then, cutting through the silence of the night, I heard the distinctive, heavy clack of the front door unlocking, followed by the soft swing of the door and the solid click of it shutting. My dad was home. Relief washed over me, and I closed my heavy eyes, trying to sink back into sleep. Downstairs, I listened to his familiar footsteps pacing across the hardwood floor. Slow, measured, deliberate. Then came the creak of the bottom stair and the heavy thud of his shoes ascending to the second floor. He walked right down the hallway, stopping dead outside my bedroom. A moment later, the door slowly groaned open, spilling a sliver of hallway darkness into my room. I was too tired to move, too tired to speak. I assumed he was just doing his usual routine, checking to make sure I was still breathing, still alive under the covers. Except the silence dragged on. Seconds ticked by. 5, 10, 15. The heavy stillness in the doorway felt suffocating. Driven by a sudden, uneasy itch at the back of my neck, I tiredly cracked one eye open. Standing in my doorway was a tall, unnaturally rigid silhouette. Because the house was pitch black, I couldn't make out a face, only a towering, broad-shouldered outline cutting off the ambient light. He wasn't moving. He was just peering in, staring down at me with an intense, unblinking stillness that made my skin crawl. My dad never lingered like this. It felt predatory, like an animal studying its prey in the dead of night. Before my foggy brain could process the wrongness of it, the shadow shifted. He turned away, walking down the hall toward the master bedroom. But as he left, he didn't pull my bedroom door shut. He left it wide open, a gaping black mouth facing my bed. That single detail, the open door, shocked me completely awake. My heart did a violent, sickening somersault against my ribs. Why would he leave my door open? He never leaves my door open. Breath catching in my throat, I crept out of bed on shaking legs and peered out into the hallway. Every door was shut tight, except for the master bedroom, where absolute, suffocating darkness poured out. No lights, no sound of movement, just a heavy, suffocating vacuum. Confused and trembling, I hurried back to my room, shut the door with a trembling click, and snatched my phone off the nightstand. I unlocked the screen to check the time. It was 2:01 a.m. Right beneath the clock, my lock screen displayed a string of unread text bubbles from my dad. "How are you feeling? Still awake? Let me know if you need anything." And then, the last message, timestamped at 1:40 a.m., just 20 minutes ago. "Just heading out now, on my way home." My blood turned to ice water. My stomach plummeted into a bottomless void. My dad worked an hour away. Even if he had left the second he sent that text, he couldn't possibly be home for another 40 minutes. The man wandering around our master bedroom was not my dad. A sudden paralyzing wave of terror locked my joints. I stood frozen in the center of my room, staring at the doorknob. when I heard them. Creak. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps creeping back down the hallway from the master bedroom. They stopped right outside my door. I could feel him standing there on the other side of the wood. I knew he had noticed that I had closed the door. The silence stretched out like a rubber band pulled to its absolute limit. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 terrifying seconds of pure, agonizing suspense as he silently debated whether to turn the handle. Then, without warning, the tension snapped. A frantic, thunderous rush of footsteps sprinted down the hall, hammered down the stairs, and vanished into the lower floor. I didn't wait to hear if the front door opened or closed. I threw myself at the door, locked the deadbolt, threw my dresser against the frame, and dialed 911 with fingers that refused to stop shaking. The police arrived within minutes, sweeping the house with flashlights drawn. But the intruder was gone. Every window and door was securely latched. Nothing was stolen. It was as if a ghost had walked through the walls. The police and my dad eventually came to a chilling conclusion. The man wasn't a random burglar. He was someone waiting for my dad. Someone who knew our routine. Someone with a malicious, deeply personal motive. But because I never saw his face in the dark, we never found out who he was. We moved out by the end of the week, and my dad changed jobs. We never spoke of it again, but to this day, whenever I see a dark doorway left half open in the dead of night, I can still feel that heavy, invisible shadow staring down at me. Years later, I thought I had left that kind of paranoia behind. I was living alone, working a remote overnight security gig from a quiet suburban house. It was an easy, boring job, monitoring camera feeds and automated alerts for various commercial properties across the state from the comfort of my laptop. It was late October, just a few days before Halloween, and a torrential, violent storm was lashing against the house. Heavy wind rattled the siding, and sheets of rain pounded the roof like gravel. To pass the time in my second-floor office, I put on a horror movie through my headphones, letting the cinematic dread blend with the actual storm outside. Midway through the film, through the muffled cushion of my headphones, I thought I heard something. A sharp, strained sound. I paused the movie and ripped the headset off, holding my breath. The rain was deafening, hammering the window panes relentlessly. But cutting through the chaos of the storm, I heard it again. A faint, muffled voice calling out from somewhere down below. It sounded agonizingly close, as if someone was standing directly beneath my window, screaming against the wind. Heart pounding, I pushed my chair back, hurried downstairs, and swept through the dark house, peering through every window. The neighborhood was dead. No cars, no lights, no wandering figures. Just the blinding sheets of rain swallowing the street lamps. Convinced it was just the wind playing tricks on my overactive imagination, I walked into the kitchen to pour myself a fresh cup of coffee. As the dark liquid filled the mug, I decided to check the downstairs perimeter one last time. I stepped into the hallway, and my blood ran cold. The side window, a window I knew I had locked hours ago, was cracked open a few inches. The heavy rain was blowing in, soaking the sill. But worse than the open window was the lingering, chilling sensation that the voice I had heard wasn't coming from outside the glass. It had been echoing from inside the house. My heart hammered against my ribs as I inched toward the stairs, clutching my coffee mug like a weapon. The storm outside seemed to amplify the eerie stillness indoors, drowning out any subtle creaks or footsteps. When I reached the first floor, I froze. Footsteps. Heavy, squelching footsteps echoed faintly from the direction of the front foyer. Someone was inside. Panic overriding my common sense, I didn't hide. I ran to the front door, threw it open, and stepped out onto the porch overhang, scanning the darkness. The yard was empty, just a massive, shimmering puddle pooling beneath the open window. Think, I told myself, my hands trembling. You're losing your mind. It's just the storm. Desperate to normalize my racing heart, I retreated inside, locked the front door, bolted the side window, and practically sprinted back up the stairs to my second-floor office. I sat back down at my desk, put my headphones on, and forced myself to stare back at the computer monitor, trying to lose myself in the glowing screen. 3 hours passed in absolute silence. The storm began to taper off, dropping to a steady, melancholic drizzle. I had almost completely talked myself out of my terror, assuming the whole ordeal was just auditory fatigue from the howling wind. My YouTube video ended, plunging the room into a brief, quiet lull. Deciding to take a quick stretch, I turned my chair around to stand up and stopped dead, every muscle in my body turning to stone. My eyes locked onto the bottom of my office doorway. Cutting across the warm light spilling from the hallway was the distinct, undeniable shadow of a pair of shoes. Someone was standing right on the other side of the door, completely motionless, staring in. Worse, I hadn't locked the office door. Why would I? I was alone in the house. The shadow didn't move. It just lingered there, waiting, breathing in the quiet dark of the hallway. Panic surged through my veins. Should I leap up and lock it, revealing that I knew he was there? Or should I stay dead silent and pray he went away? 5 agonizing minutes melted into eternity. The shadow remained pinned to the floor, unblinking, unmoving. The sheer psychological torture of not knowing who was out there finally broke my restraint. I couldn't take it anymore. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged across the room and slammed the door shut, throwing the privacy lock into place. The second the lock clicked home, hell broke loose. A heavy hand violently grabbed the doorknob, rattling it viciously back and forth. When it wouldn't budge, the man began hammering his fists against the wood in a frenzy. Then he started screaming. It wasn't a stranger's roar. It was a high-pitched, unhinged, disturbingly desperate wail. He screamed my name over and over, his voice cracking with manic urgency. "Open the door! Please just open the door! I need to talk to you! I'll leave you alone, I swear! Just let me in!" The way he spoke, the bizarre, forced familiarity in his voice, made my stomach heave. He sounded like a man possessed, acting as if we were old friends playing a twisted game. But I had never heard that voice in my life. "Open the door! Let me in!" he shrieked, slamming his weight against the wood, causing the entire frame to splinter and shake. I stumbled backward, tripping over my chair, covering my ears as the violent barrage continued without mercy. And then, as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. Silence swallowed the room. Trembling from head to toe, I kept my eyes glued to the base of the door. The shadow was still there, stretching across the floorboards. 20 agonizing seconds passed. Then, the shadow slowly pulled back. I heard the muffled squelch of wet shoes rushing down the stairs and the front door slamming shut into the rainy night. The police searched the house for hours, combing the surrounding woods with canine units. They found pry marks on the rear back door and forced entry points along the windowsills. The intruder hadn't picked a lock. He had spent hours maneuvering through the house while I sat upstairs with my headphones on, completely oblivious. I packed my bags that very night and never stepped foot in that house again. To this day, whenever I hear someone calling my name in the wind, I still feel the cold phantom weight of a shadow waiting just outside my door. If you think a locked door can always keep you safe, let me tell you about the summer after college. It was nearly 5 years ago, right as the semester ended. Instead of flying straight home to my parents in Minnesota from my campus in Boulder, Colorado, I decided to be spontaneous. I packed up my old sedan and decided to drive across the country, a sprawling, multi day road trip through the heart of the American plains. At first, the endless, flat oceans of farmland were strangely hypnotic. But as the miles dragged on and the route pushed deeper into heavily forested, isolated backcountry, the weather turned. Dark, bruised storm clouds rolled across the sky, opening up into a torrential, blinding downpour. Fatigued, 10 hours deep into driving through pitch black wilderness, I decided I couldn't go another mile. I pulled out my phone and searched for the nearest lodging. Google Maps spat out a single result: a small, independent motel situated well off the main highway, nestled down a narrow, one-lane service road surrounded by dense pine trees. I turned off the highway, bumping down the decaying, unlit asphalt road for 20 agonizing minutes. Finally, a pair of flickering neon signs cut through the dark, a rundown gas station, and directly behind it, a decrepit, single-story motel. Cash was tight, and I figured a cheap room was a cheap room. But as I pulled into the empty gravel parking lot, a heavy wave of unease hit my chest. There wasn't a single car parked outside the units. The place looked entirely dead, save for a few sickly, buzzing neon tubes illuminating a peeling marquee that read "Vacancy." I killed my engine, stepped out into the freezing rain, and hurried toward the motel office. Inside, the lights were on, but the atmosphere was deeply wrong. The lobby wasn't staged or decorated like any normal business. It looked hastily thrown together, dusty and abandoned, like a stage set left behind in an empty warehouse. The front desk was completely unmanned. I stood in the stale, dead air for 60 seconds, listening to the hum of an old refrigerator, before my survival instinct screamed at me to get out. I turned on my heel, bolted back to my car, and threw myself into the driver's seat, desperate to get back to the safety of the main highway. I threw the car into drive and stepped on the gas. I barely made it 15 seconds down the dark, one-lane access road before my engine coughed, sputtered, and completely died. All the dashboard lights flickered and flatlined. The car rolled to a silent halt along the muddy shoulder. Panic seized my chest. I turned the key over and over. Nothing. The engine was entirely dead, as if it had been surgically disabled. I looked out the window. Absolute pitch black wilderness surrounded me on all sides, with only the decaying motel and gas station glowing ominously behind me in the distance. Stranded on a dead road in the middle of nowhere, I felt violently, terrifyingly exposed. My only option was to walk back to the gas station and use their shelter to call for help. I grabbed my phone, popped open my umbrella, and trudged back through the pouring rain, immediately dialing AAA. The automated voice informed me that the nearest tow truck was 45 minutes away. I reached the gas station doors, only to realize with a sinking heart that they were locked tight. The lights inside were on, but nobody was home. Trapped and desperate, I circled back to the motel office, hoping against hope that someone had finally appeared at the front desk. The lobby remained completely empty, dead silent except for the drumbeat of rain pounding the metal roof. Unease morphing into sheer dread, I stepped down the dimly lit hallway, calling out into the empty corridors. "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the hollow echo of my own voice bouncing off peeling wallpaper. Then I heard it. A loud, violent thump echoing from deep within the building. It sounded heavy and deliberate, like a massive body slamming directly into drywall. That was my final warning. I turned around and sprinted out of the building, tearing across the gravel toward my stranded car parked 50 feet down the road. As I drew closer to my vehicle through the blinding sheets of rain, I froze in my tracks. A silhouette was sitting inside my car. Someone was rummaging through my front seat, the faint glow of a flashlight illuminating their face against the dark glass. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned my head to look back toward the motel. Standing in the open doorway of the motel office, staring straight at me through the rain, was a second man. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't ducking out of sight. He was standing completely still in the frame, watching me with cold, predatory intent, tracking my every move. A primal, survival-driven panic overrode my thoughts. I didn't go back to the car. I veered off the road and made a dead sprint straight into the pitch-black wall of dense pine trees. I crashed through wet branches, stumbled over roots, and ran blindly into the dark until the highway and the motel lights vanished completely behind a wall of foliage. Shivering, soaked to the bone, and terrified to make a sound, I crouched behind a thick trunk and dialed 911. The dispatcher told me a highway patrol officer was 20 minutes away. I waited in the freezing dark for what felt like a lifetime, clutching my phone like a lifeline. When the familiar red and blue flash of a police cruiser finally cut through the trees along the road, I stumbled out of the woods and flagged him down. We walked back to my car together. The vehicle was empty. The doors were unlocked, my glove box had been ransacked, and the motel behind us was once again pitch black and deathly silent, as if no one had ever been there at all. The state trooper looked around the desolate area and shook his head, looking at me with a mix of pity and disbelief. "Kid, you've got a death wish stopping out here. Get in the cruiser." He stayed with me until the tow truck finally arrived, loading my car onto the flatbed. As we drove away toward the next city, I spilled the entire terrifying story to the tow truck driver. He didn't look surprised in the slightest. In fact, he looked grim. "Son," the driver said, keeping his eyes on the winding highway, "that area used to be a bustling logging town years ago, but the industry collapsed. Nobody lives out there anymore. Every single one of those buildings, the motel, the gas station, they've been abandoned for a decade." My blood ran cold. Abandoned? But the lights were on. "DYTIS bait," he replied flatly. "There are 30 or 40 boarded up houses hidden just past those trees. They keep the lights on out front to lure stranded drivers down that dead-end road. And let me tell you something else. When my crew popped your hood to load you up, we found your engine block. The timing belt had been intentionally sliced clean through with a razor blade. Your car didn't break down by accident. They made sure it did." The words hung heavy in the cab, suffocating me. If I hadn't trusted my gut and sprinted blindly into those dark woods when I saw those men inside my car, the tow truck driver wouldn't have pulled up to a stranded motorist. He would have pulled up to an empty road, and I would have vanished into the dark with them.